Yeah, so Edward Solomon. So what he did was he got the precinct tabulation log for Georgia off of the New York Times website, um, and essentially what that is a bunch of JSON files. Each JSON file is you've got a timestamp, and that is the current running total for each precinct at that timestamp. So there are 2,656 precincts, with 4 entries each. One for absentee ballots, one for early ballots, one for election day ballots, one for provisional ballots. What Edward Solomon did is he took some of those timestamps. I don't know how many. In my research, I used 96. He took I don't know how many, but essentially he concatenated them all, or he converted them to CSV, concatenated them all, uh, which is easy to do. I mean, I did that myself using a Python script. Just convert the JSON files to CSV, and then you concatenate the files using simple command in CMD, like copy and then asterisk all CSVs into one CSV. So very easy to do. And then basically what he did is he uses LibreOffice. I use Excel, but he had a list then of all the precincts. So 2656 precincts. He combined the absentee, early, provisional, election day ballots into one column, into one row for each precinct. So essentially, he had 2,656 precincts times however many updates it was, just a big list. Then he used a formula to for a column next to it, giving the Trump percentage out of the total for each running total. So there's a column that now has the Trump percentage for every precinct, and then he orders by the Trump percentage. So he has this big list now of 2,656 precincts times however many, for instance, 90. So that's how many rows there are. And 90 lots of 2656 each is a snapshot of the state of the precinct at that particular timestamp. So there are 90 timestamps. So he now has this big list. And essentially what he did is he ordered by the Trump total, the Trump percentage, and he sees that these he sees that the Trump percentages are suspect because there are loads of them that have this specific ratio. So what he did is he identified the ones that were suspicious, so ones that I'm not entirely sure how, but basically some of these perfect ratios were suspicious, i.e. they occurred on the same timestamp, or they transferred between different precincts at different times. Essentially what he did is he isolated all of those, so there were 372, and then what he did was he consolidated the totals for every percentage. So you've got these totals here for 50%. He consolidated those So this is the total. This is Trump total. If you add up all those totals and then you add up all the Trump totals, and then you just have one row for 0.5%, you have the total, and then the total Trump total for that percentage. So he did that, and then he has a unique list of percentages and the totals and the Trump totals. and that's when he realized, well, he assumes that now all these votes must be fake. He assumes that these votes must be fake, and when you sum it together, you get 200,325. Problem is, we don't actually know whether they are fake or not. We don't know whether they have been, whether they were real votes and they were added on, fake votes were added on and they were molded into those percentages, or whether they were all fake votes. So essentially, what he realized is that the totals that you now have, the totals that you have each percentage, he assumed that that these numbers must have been selected. These numbers must have been selected, and then you times each number by the percentage, the percentage that was intended, not the percentage that they're at, the percentage that was intended. So essentially, he worked out that there must be a circle that's divided into so many parts, in this case 2,231, and the total must be being applied to each radii on the circle. So a number has to be selected to weight that particular radii, such that if you weight all the radii in a cluster, and I think this list of percentages, 372, consolidated down into 140 something individual percentages. So he worked out that essentially it must be that a circle has been split into a number of parts, which he found out to be 2,231, and then there must be a cluster of radii around a particular radii that it's trying to be average, a particular radius that's trying to be averaged out to. For instance, if there are 141, then there's going to be 70 either side, and there's going to be one radius that's trying to be averaged out at. And if you have 100 one side, and to the radius next to that one, 100 radius next to that, obviously it cancels out, because you have 200 total votes. You times the percentage at that radius, so each radius is, so the radius at the 12th hour on the clock, if you will, or the 90-degree position on the complex plane. Let's imagine that's going to be the first radius there is going to be 0 out of 2231 and 2231 out of 2231, because it's 0 and 60 degrees. And then the radius next to that is going to be 1 over 2231. You calculate the percentage, what's 1 over 2231, and then the radius to the right of that is going to be 2 over 2231, and all the way around the circle to 2231 out of 2231. And essentially he works out that the totals must be selected, placed at a certain radius, then you times that total by the percentage of that radius. For instance, 223 over 2231, which is just under 10%, for instance, and then you get the trump total. And essentially, if we use an example, if we say here, well, the total for 0.544 is going to be 1460 add 2044. It's 3504. And now let's say let's forget this percentage. Let's say that this percentage is actually the intended percentage was the intended radius for this total 2504 that was selected is going to be 223 over 2231. So then that's the percentage of the radius. You times that by 3504, and then you get the trump total, which is 350.24. So the number is going to be for trump is going to be 350.24. But you can't have a decimal place vote for Trump that's then split between the precincts. In that case, there are two. So you can't have a decimal place total for Trump. So you have to round it down, and you want to round it down because you don't want to round it up and give Trump more votes. So every number you see for a Trump total, you have to assume that it was either exactly that number, or it was a number between that number and the next number, that number plus 1. So it's going to be a floor function. It's going to be the floor function of. So you have to realize that this number 350 is 350 is going to be, it was either 350, it was 350.1, 2, it was 350.9, but it's always going to be rounded down. So that's the assumption he made. The assumption he made is that the Trump totals are numbers that have been rounded down from some number that they were trying to approximate, and accordingly their percentages decrease, because then you get 350, and then you get 350 over 3504, and you find that it wasn't the same percentage. So the percentage on the wheel is not going to be, because the real Trump total is 350. The real Trump total is 350.24. The Trump total that appears and then is split up across the precincts is actually 350. So essentially what he did is he had to work out, well, how has the circle been split up, and the way to work that out is that if you add 1 to all the Trump totals that you now have for each individual percentage, and then you take 1 away, so you get all the Trump totals plus 1, and then you take 1 away, the number on the wheel has to change. So it has to change because it's indicative then of it being in 2 different sectors. And we know that the dividing the radius is at 350.24. So when you see the number 350 and 351, they're going to be in 2 different sectors of the circle. They have to be in 2 different sectors. If they're not, then that wasn't how the circle was divided, because then it means the radius on the circle with the wheel number that you're testing is does not have a radius such that it places those in 2 different sectors of the circle, because the floor of this is one sector, and the ceiling is going to be in another sector, perhaps the adjacent one, or one much further around. But essentially for wheel numbers, if you test a wheel number like 10, basically all the wheel numbers higher than that are going to start to fail, because the granularity is much smaller. So if you've got a number out of 3,000 and you add 1 to it, it's only going to move it slightly. The chances of that being in a different sector on a circle that's divided into 10 different sectors is low. If you divide it by the correct number of sectors, it's going to make sure that basically every single number, and the numbers you need to focus on are the ones, particularly as you increase the as you move through the totals and it starts to be at 3,000, at 4,000, they're the numbers that are going to start failing when you test that wheel number, because when you add 1, it's only a small number. But so essentially across all of the 140 individual percentages that he tested, each one, when you increased it by 1, the wheel number, when you increased the Trump total by 1, the point on the wheel changed, i.e. the sector changed, because for each sector you use the ceiling to get the sector number. So the very first sector in the circle is sector 1, and that might be 0 point whatever. But then, you know, that rounds up. So yeah, if we use an example here, you've got to work out, well, 350. So we've got 350 over 3504 times 2231. It's going to be 222.84. You get the ceiling, that's sector number 223. And then if you increase that number by 1, which was 351 over 3504 times 2231, you get 223.4. So that's now in the next sector, and that rounds up to sector number, the ceiling, sector number 224. So they're in two different sectors. The percentages that end up being used. So obviously that is then split across all of the precincts that are hijacked. Now, when you've got the list of 140 individual percentages that are used, and then the numbers that were selected, and then times by the point on the wheel, the radius, and the fraction that has, and then it always gets the floor of the result. They're now all the trump totals, because you always want to round down to trump. Here's the thing. It turns out that the average now of, if you add up all the totals for each individual percentage and then all the trump totals, the trump total is 14.65% of the total. That's the average. Turns out that that's one of the radii on the circle, and it's being averaged out, that particular one. It's a very center one, because when you put an equal number across all of the percentages, it averages out at the same exact number, which is the center radius that they're clustered around. Because and that proves that it's fraud, because the chances are extremely low of having all of these seemingly random numbers at each different weighting. So you have the center radius, and the one next to it is not as powerful as the one further away from it, because a radius 2 away on one side, if you put 100 on that, that's equal to 200 on the radius 1 away on the other side. It's more powerful. Well, that's just an example. It's not quite double, obviously, if you're dividing the circle into 2, 2, 3, 1 parts. But essentially it has more of an impact. Now, if you put an equal number on each radius around the center radius, even number either side, an equal number either side, then it's going to average out of the center radius, because you've got 20,000 on one side, 20,000 on the other side, and then 20,000 2 away on one side and 20,000 2 away on the other side, and they're going to cancel each other out in terms of the mean percentage. The average fraction is going to be the one at that particular radius. So here's the thing, he's got all of these different random weights, but they all average out somehow. These different random weights at their different radii, their different percentages that they're times by, somehow it's come out the same result. So that shows fault. That's the essence of it. Thing is that the problem arises when you try and work out, well, how many of those votes are fraudulent? Are they all fraudulent? Or have they all been randomly added? Well, here's the thing, you've got Elizabeth 03 here. And he's basically saying then that every single vote in this precinct is fake. And that would mean that, he's adding them up. He gets 200,000. But that's how many votes total were in the precinct. That means that in the precinct there were 0 real votes. Not so when he adds them all up, Biden has a net gain of 200,000. Well, that would only be the case if there were 0 votes in those precincts and all of these votes were fake, and then you've got 280,000 fake votes for Biden. 240,000 fake votes for Biden, 40,000 fake votes for Trump. That's not the case. Obviously, these numbers have been fashioned. So the real votes, there have to be real votes behind it. But that Trump gets, that does better in. But I would say that 200,000 of this is not the net gain for Biden. The net gain for Biden is probably going to be, if you assume that the average is 14.65%, you can imagine that the real Trump total was maybe 30%. So the gain, and they're probably using real votes. All of these were real votes at some point. They've just switched some of them. They've packed them out to the ratios to get those particular ratios in those precincts that would have been predicted, maybe 30% average for Trump. Now it's only 14%. So the actual votes gained would have been something like, well, you can calculate it. 28747 7424 times 0.3. That's 86,000. Well, that's only a net gain of 43,000. So I mean that's the problem with this. I think he needs to elucidate. Because actually net gain 43 minus 43, so 86. It's actually 86,000. 86,000. Fortunately, though, that is not all of the fraud. Because when we look at our good friend boobies.csv, ordered by Biden percentage this time. So this is my spreadsheet that actually shows the individual modifications that were made to each entry, and it has all of them separate. So this is the difference between my spreadsheet and Edward Solomon's spreadsheet. Edward Solomon combines for each precinct early provisional absentee election day, and then he uses the running totals. So he just has a list of the different running totals for each precinct as they update. With me, I compared the running totals side by side and shifted it down by 1. So you get the list of the running totals ordered by timestamp, and then you put the side of it and shift it down by 1 update. Then you have the totals that were added at each update, and then obviously these columns sum up 2.457 million for Trump, 2.471 million for Biden. But this went up to 4:10 p.m. Eastern time, November the 11th. So there were actually some reductions. There were a lot of negative votes. I'm going to assume that they were some form of quality control, because when I add up the totals for Ware County, I get the pre-audit results using a timestamp further on from this, where votes are taken away. If I use this to get the total for Ware County, I get about plus 200 votes over what they reported. So and their hand recount confirmed that there was a switch, 37 votes, but that had nothing to do with the negative votes taken away. That was clearly in one of the hijacked precincts, one of the precincts that had 80%. However, we do have negative votes that are taken away, 5,114 for Trump, that aren't accounted for in the totals. Negligible, and I don't know why. But here you have obviously a list of 23,414 updates for overall. So that's how many updates were made to the individual entries over 1 million row spreadsheet of 2656 precincts times 4 entries times 96 updates. That's a million rows. Only 23,414 rows have updates that were actually made where the entry actually changed. Here are all of the individual discrete entries that changed, and here there's a problem that is not detected when you're looking at the running totals, and that's pretty obvious. I mean, straight away you can see how many 0.909s there are. 330, 26, 26, 260, 26, 170, 17, 88, 66, 55, 44, 33, and you know, they're all individual updates that were made, and as you can see, they're all some of them are on the same timestamps, but there are a lot. Just this alone for Biden here is getting 1,930 just for that. Trump's obviously getting a 193, and when you look at Trump's side, so 0.1 for Biden, there's nothing like this, absolutely nothing like this, and every single ratio like this is packed out on Biden's side, packed out. Look at this, 99.9, 88.8, 77.7. They're absolutely packed out. But on Trump's side, it's not. And much less so. I mean, there's a lot for 33. There is a lot for 33.3, but a lot less for Trump than Biden. If you think that's a lot for 33.3, when you see Biden's, it's about 10 times more. So, but the problem is the problem with looking at the running totals is you don't see this. Again, here's a 0.85714 for Biden. A lot of these. But if you look at the previous votes in the precincts, it's not zero. So that starts here. If you look at the previous votes in the precinct, we're actually looking at this. Lots of votes already in there, and none of them are at that percentage of. You've got 0.857, but none of those are at that particular percentage, 0.857. The only one is Edward Solomon's going to see are these, because they've got 0 votes, and now that perfect ratio has appeared, so you can see it at the running total because there are 0 current votes in the precinct. Bearing in mind that these are all separate entries, they need to be combined into the individual precincts. But when you actually look at the individual updates for the individual voting types in each precinct, you get those big sort of spread of. And what I think is that I almost feel like potentially there could be like lots of individual virtual precincts at that percentage, exactly like what Edward Solomon says is at the running total level. But I think that this is like one virtual precinct, and then it gets spread across all those different precincts as a very small batch, and it gets added, and only some of them percolate through to be seen at the running total level. However, the ones that come through and were actually identified by Edward Solomon and then added up and somehow managed to satisfy that linear algebra equation such that it balanced out the wheel at that particular point, same point it does when you put equal number of votes on each point on the wheel. So that is interesting. However, a lot of those go undetected because you already have votes in the precinct that aren't at that ratio. You add that particular fixed ratio, it now becomes another ratio. Here, it now becomes another ratio. Well, that came out exactly 85% after it added those votes. So that's the thing. It's that you can't see it because the current running total might not be a suspicious ratio, and then the resulting running total might not be a suspicious ratio. So that's the thing. And when you actually look at my research here, Biden wins every one of these small batches. So he wins well. Firstly, the batch size follows this reciprocal function pattern. Basically, every single batch size decreases in frequency in a reciprocal fashion. And then you look at this. If you actually look at the individual vote additions for each candidate, so not batch size, but when they gain the total number of votes at a particular entry update, Trump gained 0, 1, 2, and 3 votes much more frequently than Biden. However, Biden gained 4 through 84 much more frequently than Trump. So the number of times that 4 through 84 was added to Biden's total was much more frequent. Every single number. And you can see it. You can see it here. How every single number is above, and then it merges together, and then Trump actually wins 89 of the 93 largest batches. Although I think this was 89 of the 93 largest numbers, and then if all votes added to a candidate size 23 are removed, Trump wins. So if we actually look at the batch size, as it gets smaller, it converges on 80% for absentee overall. Absentee converges on 80% linearly. So the smaller the batch size, the average Biden percentage for a batch of that size increases. So you get all the batches that size get the percentages, and you get the mean percentage. It increases linearly, converges about 80%. But hang on, Biden only won these by 50%, 50 something percent absentee and early. And early and absentee are exactly the same point. Exactly, it converges. They look exactly the same. Despite the fact that Trump actually won early ballots but lost absentee. So Trump actually won early ballots. So actually it should have averaged, but here, 40-something%. But it's actually there. But Trump wins every small batch size. So there's something fishy with these small batches that are being added. And so either these small batches are represent a virtual precinct that's being like the will that Edward Solomon's identified, and it's being added across a bunch of precincts in Fulton and DeKalb, and of course some of these are showing through to the running total level, which also, when you just take those, they happen to fit this. So that could be a separate procedure that's going on, what Edward Solomon's identified. But then they would interfere with each other if ones from this algorithm were being included in his ratios. So how it managed to average out is very interesting. How it managed to average out at the same point when you put an even number on every point on the wheel. But yeah, essentially, the wheel is a bunch of votes that were all put on the different radii on the circle, such that the total of all of those votes averages out at 14.65%. Election day, there is no such correlation. No such correlation. When you actually look at when you plot each vote addition for Biden and vote addition for Trump, for each percentage for Biden, so you have a batch of, so the x-axis is the batches, 0% to 100% for Biden, and then each one of those batches you plot the number of votes Trump got in it and the number of votes Biden got in it. Somehow, if you look at absentee only, somehow Biden managed to get absolutely every single fraction that approximates 100%. Every single fraction. Take away one, where the numerator is one less than the denominator, below, basically below 100, pretty much everyone. And then there's -2, there's -3, so very obvious. No such thing for Trump. I mean, look at it. Same for early. However, when you look at the election day, no such thing again. And basically Biden wins every single one of these perfect ratios. So these common ratios, if you conduct a random if you conduct a random number generation below 100, and if you consider that each batch size is somewhere below 10,000 in reality, and you've got this number generation under 100, so you've got generates 100 random numbers, and then it generates a number out of that number. So you've got 100 random fractions out of a number below 100. And you compare Biden's frequency to the average scenario. Here's the average scenario for 50,000. Biden beats, for every percentage, beats the frequency that percentage occurs. But Trump loses. And and that's a random number generation out of 100, when the batch size can go up to 10,000, and yet Biden's beaten the average for a batch, for a random number generation below 100. He's beaten the average when batch sizes can go up to 10,000. So yeah, when you compare here's the random scenario, compare it to the reality, it looks like a random number generation has been run in the background, because really it should not be that high, because you're taking really a random number below 10,000, but somehow it looks like a random number generation below 100 has been run on one side for Biden, and obviously not for Trump. And yet there you have Biden winning all of these. Biden with so many 90% batches, 30% of his batches, 30.8% of batches are above 90%. Trump only 5.79%. And here you can see the histogram of the individual Biden percentages for the batches, over 23,414 batches. Here you have a big load of 90%. So yeah, if you then look at the counties where the actual updates were made, here you can see Fulton and DeKalb and Cobb, and look at all the other counties. In Fulton alone, 32.28% of all changes that were made to the tabulation were made in Fulton, in the state. Biden won 68.4% of all updates that were made. And when you consider these statistics, how does Biden win with only 49.5%? It's all drastically skewed, and it highlights the process that's going on in the background clearly. Because now here's the thing. When you look at the frequency of updates that are made, and now the average is going to be 3 or 4. Well, the mode's going to be 3 or 4 updates per precinct, because here you have the number of precincts out of 2656, and then the number of updates made per precinct. So as you can see here, the precincts that made 3 updates were 250. Now 3 updates is a change to election day, early, and absentee. That counts as 3 different batches. That is and this one would be early, election day, absentee, provisional. And the 5 was typically 2 updates for absentee, and then 3 for the rest. Early, absentee, provisional. So that's the mode. Here you've got it's decreasing, but then you've got a sudden increase of precincts that are suddenly reporting 20, 21, 22, 23 modifications, and it's all in Fulton, it's all in DeKalb, it's all in Cobb. Why? There's a video that I'm going to put in the description that shows a woman in Detroit, showing how the ballots are counted, absentee ballots. And now remember, this is only with absentee and early ballots where these anomalies occur with all these small batches. So why is it these counties have suddenly, and these counties alone have got precincts where they've got 20, 21, 22 updates to their early and absentee tabulations, when there's a woman in Detroit that's talking about how she conducts the elections in one of the counties there. And how it works is everyone mails in the ballots to a central location, those ballots are have identification in the barcode, or that denotes what precincts it's in. So it knows what precincts it's in. So then when they come in, they're scanned and they're put into boxes for different precincts. And the woman in the video quite clearly says that for that county, they make sure, for absentee ballots, they make sure that every single absentee ballot in every precinct box is so after you have all the box of all the precincts, you verify the signatures, then you scan them, and then the scanner, the Dominion, it only shows you how many ballots you've scanned. It doesn't show you the total. And the ones that need adjudicating get adjudicated by someone, God knows where, obviously a different country. And you have the batches, so you know. All you do is confer. It tells you how many ballots have been scanned and how many ballots, and you know how many ballots you got. So that's it, and then you're done. And the woman quite clearly says that the tabulation's only made. They only submit the results once all the ballots have been scanned, which means there's only one update. There should not be 20 updates, 21 updates, and it's only in those couple of counties, and every single one of those has these very high margins for buying, 80%, and they're all these perfect ratios. So that is just obviously not right. And you can see that it actually correlates. If you get the blue line is the total number of updates made per precinct. So you order by total number of updates on the left axis, and then on the right you have the percentage for Biden. And as you can see, precincts that have more updates are all 90% for Biden. There's a correlation. It shows the same thing. And then you show the max. Batch size, and as you can see, it doesn't really decrease that much. The max batch size, when you've got these precincts that have all these updates for absentee ballots now, doesn't really decrease that much. So it's not being split evenly. Instead, they've got these small numbers being added on, because the real batch is there. The real batch for the precinct, And then you have third-party candidates progressively receive significantly fewer votes in batches 1 for Biden, batches 1 for Trump, which makes no sense, because libertarian candidates are closer to Biden's ideology. So it wouldn't make sense that in the batches Trump wins, there are more votes for these candidates. You think in the areas, the precincts that are that have that ideology, they're going to vote more for these third-party candidates, particularly Joe Jorgensen, which is actually, I think, the majority, And then you have here, for absentee ballots, 80% of the way through, you have these random. This is where the ratios start to appear, because you have the ratio for Biden here at 50%. This is where it starts to appear. Suddenly, 80% of the way through the count, all these perfect lines start to form. All favour Biden. Not so many for Trump. Big forest of updates as well. So how does this big forest of batches correspond to this? When this is 80%, this is 80%, but that's 20%. That's like 2-3 times more updates make up 20%. 2-3 times more than the ones that were 80%. So that's strange. And of course, here you have the window. in which those suitcases were taken out, and when the videos where they were scanning big stacks of ballots over and over again. Guess what? They're all a big blot of 90% for Biden at that time. That is the window, 1:36 a.m. EST. And yes, absentee ballots seem to be trending in favor of Biden. Actually, this is overall. This is overall. But when you look at early seems to trend in favor of Biden, and absentee trends in favor of Biden. So over time. In Fulton, Biden has 745 100%. 745 100%. Trump has 20, so that's 37.5 times more. You can compare that to overall. Biden has 18.58% of all tabulations are 100% for Biden. 3.95% were 100% for Trump. Very skewed. And you can see it, the big line on the here. You can see the big line, which also seems to hit every single number. And that's just about it, I think. Yeah, here when Biden takes over, got a 90% cluster of updates. So updates, that's overall. So for all of the precincts, the average Biden percentage over all of the precincts in the update. There are 5 updates here that all drastically exceed any average for Biden at any other time. And that's just when he overtakes. Funny. Obviously, Trump has absolutely no such batch in that range. 0.2 to 0. And they're the batches over time. Here I used 173 updates. And that's when the suitcase was. So